into more connection, stretching you to be able to pick them up in spirit, which is one of the reasons why they leave when they leave.
So what he's talking about there, stretching you, expanding you into being able to pick them up, he's talking about at a consciousness wavelength level, which is the idea that consciousness is not in the brain, and I pretty much firmly believe that. It's not initiating in the brain. All right, guys, it's another week of the PEM Podcast. I'm Worthington, and we're going to be getting into some more reactions. Basically been fighting an uphill battle with what I call administrative violence now, and dealing with local municipal government action, and that's been a big theme lately because we're heating up in this battle. We're heading from a planning commission hearing into a city council hearing in the middle of the summer is looking like where they pushed it back to. And so that's been kind of the theme, really all about mitigating personal ego. Had some successes, had some failures, had a neighbor that's really just jealous. And I got a lot of problems with neighbors. Unfortunately, we're not a community. It's funny how much people love to throw that word around, community and family, and how BS it really is in a lot of contexts. Not always, but it tends to be. And, neighbors that instead of coming to me with issues and problems really just harbor some sort of grudge. And we had that kind of show up in this hearing. And in his speech, I guess you would say, in his open comment to the Planning Commission, he claimed there was a noise issue, but ultimately he kept coming back around to my view of the ocean. And what it came down to really was jealousy. And that was really interesting to see that truthfully, he was just jealous of the fact that I had created a view of the ocean in my backyard, and he didn't want me to have that ability. So that was, difficult. And at the end, I approached him and I said, you're my neighbor. Why couldn't you come and talk to me like a man? And there was a bit of ego even in that. That definitely isn't what I would advise, especially coming from the perspective of pragmatic ego management and the PEM podcast and what I've even called the art of stalking. That isn't what happened there. It was a heated battle in that entire 90-minute session with the Planning Commission, which is very long, by the way, for something like that to run. They only give you 10 minutes to present your case to them. And so for something to go on back and forth with commentary and questioning and what have you for 90 minutes it's a huge battle. It was really, really wild. And so we're going to look into doing some political satire. We were just talking about this. A lot of those commissioners, they have a certain look to them. It's hard to explain. The look of power is an interesting thing. These people, these stuffy old types that sit on these panels and boards and tell other people what to do, they have a certain look. And these guys really remind me, there's an old animated cartoon called Animal Farm. It was based off the book by George Orwell called Animal Farm, the book that he won the Nobel Prize for. And so we're talking about maybe starting to do some political satire with some of that stuff. But yeah, it really does come back around again and again, the management, the ego management, and why is that so powerful? And I actually want to mention that here because I'm going to get back into my trip stories and just stories in general that I've experienced in life that showcases some of the lessons I try to talk about here. But I'm going to use a quote now, and it's attributed to Morihei Ueshiba, the founder of Aikido. If I'm even saying his name is spelled kind of interestingly, some people kind of just say it quickly, Morihei Ueshiba, but he was attributed as saying a quote. The quote goes like this, and I would say it's false to attribute it to him because the sentiment, at least, maybe he did say these words, and maybe he was the first person to say it. I doubt it. The sentiment goes back many hundreds of years to the time frame of Musashi, and most likely even before him. So the quote goes this way: "The moment someone picks a fight with me, they've already lost, because they've broken harmony with the universe, and I am the universe." That quote is a badass quote. And you can latch onto that quote and you can have all kinds of feelings about it, but I don't think that many people truly understand what that quote is talking about. And I think you have to have experienced it firsthand to understand it. What that quote is talking about is when you achieve an egoless state, then you have the ability to merge with a greater will. There's your own personal will, and then there's a will of the universe, or the will of the spirit. This is coming from a shamanic perspective. You don't have to believe what I believe. I'm not pushing that on anyone. I've experienced this through the psychedelic journey I've been on, and through the very dangerous world that I lived in and was in, life and death struggles. And so I experienced this stuff. That sentiment is that when you achieve this particular mindset, then nothing can harm you and nothing can really damage you. Nothing can really get to you. And, so when you start to slip into an ego state of mind, you're opening yourself, you're on your own, because you break harmony with the universe at that point. You disconnect yourself, if you will, from a spiritual source, and then you truly are on your own. And and I kind of even witnessed that and saw it later after I had the interaction with the neighbor, gentleman there. And it's very hard. They call it being impeccable for a reason. It's very, very difficult to constantly maintain and make sure your ego doesn't take the charge. Now, it was a very small moment, and I didn't get too out of control or anything, but there was a little rise, there was a little ego feed there, and I kind of had to go back on Monday morning, quarterback that scenario and realize, okay, that could have been handled better. I still could have said any number of things to him, but there was a moment where it started to transition into more of an egoic interaction. But that, I wanted to share that quote because that is truly the reason to kind of follow this path the way I see it in mitigating and managing ego and hopefully diminishing ego. And there's a bit of that even in, showcased in lots of movies. If you guys have ever seen the Book of Eli, that character that's played by Denzel seems to kind of have those similar sort of qualities, and you can see he's sort of almost untouchable in his interactions with the people who are, really approaching things from a morally and ethically wrong perspective, especially Gary Oldman's character in that movie. But I'm not sure that everyone picks up on that, because there's this Christian bent on that movie that really there's good and evil, and that the forces of good will prevail, and that, of course, he's on a crusade to save the Bible. But I actually see it from the lens of the ego. So wanted to open with that, guys. We're going to get into these reactions. Let's see what these videos are about. And, get some commentary going.
You want to talk about the real guru? It's your fucking vape addiction. It's your over drinking. It's like that thing is teaching you better than any book or any person could. It's in the moment demonstrating to you all the mystical truths, which is, you're stuck in it's called samsara. You're stuck in this loop of suffering, this endless loop of suffering that you are imposing on yourself. That C.S. Lewis quote? The gates of hell are locked from the inside. Like, isn't that great? Anytime you want out, you can get the fuck out.
Ooh, that's a good one.
It's a good one.
That's a good one.
That's a great quote. It's 100% true. That's what this is fundamentally why one of the main reasons I have my perspective on the war on drugs and drugs in general. Drugs are tools, and it is my God-given right, my right from birth to put in my body what I decide to put in my body. It should not be the government's choice. Now, that being said, there are very real risks with putting things in your body, as we know all too well. And addictions are very interesting things because it's very apropos that he calls them guru. The guru here is your addiction, because I think it does point to that programming. In last week's episode, it talked about programming and all the ways that human beings are programmed. And I think, unfortunately, the ease with which we're programmed is, both it's a double-edged sword. So addiction, once it reaches a really ingrained level, is very hard to stop that momentum, because it's very much like a momentum, like a freight train that's been moving for a long time. And you have to understand the underlying reasons why you've chosen to do something that's damaging to yourself. And that means you're misusing this tool. And, with he's vaping, for instance, I don't know that vaping's a tool or not. I'm not big on the vaping because it still concerns me a bit on how that's working. And of course, they had trouble, forget what years those were, not that long ago, where people were having some serious problems with the vape stuff in their lungs. And that's just a delivery method issue, though. That's not nicotine. Nicotine's not a problem the way I see it. Nicotine is very addictive. I've been addicted to nicotine. I can ingest nicotine now without addiction. I can ingest nicotine at will when I so choose and not have a monkey on my back. But there are certain rules there. How often, how many consecutive times within a week or within a certain period of time that I ingest nicotine is important, because there is an actual, I would say there is a physical aspect there that gets involved with certain types of substances, especially things like nicotine. Obviously, opiates, those are the really main ones. Anything like barbiturates or benzodiazepines, very serious addictions can happen there. Alcohol is one of the worst ones, along with barbiturates and benzodiazepines. So, there's rules around this stuff that are physical protocols, I would say. And then there's the psyche level stuff, the things that I think he's really intending to talk about there, which is what is motivating you to damage your own self. If you're damaging yourself, there's something going on at a deep psyche level, at a trauma stored level that is driving you and motivating you to do things. And I think most people, because those programs, and there really are programs at that point within themselves, are underneath the surface, so people aren't aware of them, and they just say, well, why do I keep doing this to myself? Why do I do this? If they even reach that point where they ask that question. Some people don't even ask that question. They just continue down this program path to which their awareness is so dim. There's so little awareness in those folks. And that's why the suffering is so great. And that truly is what I believe the meaning of this life is. The meaning of the entire universe is that it is tending towards greater and greater awareness. So anytime you get held up on your awareness growth path, you face suffering. And then it's up to you to find a way to grow in awareness. And that's very difficult because, as the cliche saying goes, you don't know what you don't know. So that's very hard to break through that veil. Very hard to break through that veil. Addiction is not an easy thing. And you need, most people need some sort of guidance. Most people need someone to help them see the light and kind of find their way through the maze towards a higher level of awareness. And also, this is where I disagree with some of the common rhetoric out there and directives or suggestions around addiction that once an addict, always an addict. I actually fully disagree with that. I do not agree that's true. I believe that, if someone is unable to ever achieve a place where they could take that substance again without immediately relapsing back into addiction, that really the truth is that they haven't addressed whatever the deeper levels of trauma are that are triggering that every time they ingest that substance. And people are not going to like that statement. I've had people get very, very upset about that. And I find that interesting that they get so upset about it. I take it very personally. And I think that's because there's ego involved and their identity is wrapped up in this, that I am an addict, and therefore whenever you say that something that's contrary to that idea, it attacks the identity, which is directly linked to ego. And it's funny how our world is so caught up in identity. I was listening to a news episode yesterday on NPR or something, and they were talking about identities and how important people's identities are. And this woman was a Nigerian woman who had grown up with certain challenges, and that was her identity. And this man had, had this experience in the UK and had whatever his circumstances were, and that was his identity and how important his identities are. I call bullshit on identity. No, it's not. It is not important, your identity. That is the ego. What is important is perhaps identities can be switched through if you can really detach yourself, and that's detachment that comes with deep spiritual practices. The identity is sort of this interface that we all interact with based off the rational part of people's character and minds. And so identities are important, that they give us an interface to work with. But they're not important for your survival necessarily at the level of when people's identities are attacked, they start to lose their damn minds. And that's the attachment to that identity that is directly linked to ego that leads to suffering. That's all part of this topic that we're talking about here. And then can very easily lead to these type of practices, these type of cycles and loops of suffering and, as of course, addiction. So that's why I see there's a lot to that subject.
They're allowing this shit to, and guess where the human trafficking actually is happening? Ukraine. And then guess where they're tricking you to send your money and support over to? Ukraine. The largest human trafficking hub in the world, Ukraine. Why do you think Vladimir Putin is pushing back against them? What, like, it's fucking Russia. It's Russia, for crying out loud. It's literally fucking Russia. The largest fucking country in the world, basically. Like, come on, like the actual Tartarian Empire. The strongest military next to ours. Thank God that he's friends with us. But the simple fact that Ukraine is this tiny little smudge in the corner, and then this... Oh, fucking, of course. Literally, like, just so you know I'm not fucking lying, literally get live restricted. Thank God I'm recording this on here. Literally get live restricted as I'm talking about this. Give me a fucking break. Give me a fucking break. You fucking cowards. You tyrannical fucking cowards. I think that's a good moment to stop, actually. That's a good fucking moment to stop. You cowards. You fucking cowards. 350 people consecutively in that live, and then they just take my live access away. Give me a fucking break. You fucking cowards. Before I even got to show the world what you're actually fucking looking for. What you actually fucking want. This doesn't mean shit to anybody else. Anybody else that's gonna see that, yeah. This has everything to do with the Titanic. This is the last relic that they couldn't find, and I have it. I own it. Yeah, y'all didn't want that to be seen. Okay.
Well, a couple different issues going on there. I'm going to talk about the cancellation issue there, which I find abhorrent, regardless of what this person's saying. I think we have a major cultural conviction, value-based issue in this country that we need to change and hold our corporations to that standard. But I don't know that we all agree with it. And I think there are people who are trying to manipulate the status of power. And they're doing that by manipulating information and not allowing people to speak their minds. And I think it's a major mistake for a lot of reasons. But I'm going to get back to that. Let's talk about human trafficking in the Ukraine. If you've been watching this channel at all, or if you've watched a lot of earlier episodes, my issue is always confirming information with hard evidence and with evidence that has critical thinking behind it and fact checking and resource verification and those type of things. So we don't have that here. Fair enough. But this is what I'll say from a logical perspective. He mentions the Ukraine. What about Gaza? What about Somalia? What about the Sudan? What about anywhere that you're seeing major conflict in and places falling into complete chaos and war-torn zones? My suspicion would be that you're going to see human trafficking in those areas, that you're going to see all kinds of manner of human atrocities, and especially human trafficking, because you've got a breakdown of any structure in those areas. You've got major holes in, the governance and, policing and things like that are compromised when you're having these type of conflicts ongoing. So to me, it would seem that those would be targets for people interested in human trafficking because it would most likely be easier to get away with that. So I'm not sure how far he's going with that and what he says. He says something weird. He's talking about Russia and he mentions Putin. He goes, thank God we're friends with him. I would not say we're friends with Putin, so I don't know if he meant that at all. I don't believe we're friends with Putin at this point. So I didn't quite catch that or quite understand that part. He doesn't explain any further. But the human trafficking, that would be all I could comment on without further information and again, more evidence and exactly what he means. My perspective is that war zones are just factories for atrocities, and you're going to see human trafficking and all kinds of things happen there. So I wouldn't find any surprise in the fact that there's an elevated, incident level of human trafficking in Ukraine and many other, war-torn areas. So that's all I would say there. Let's address the violin. Again, interesting comment about the Titanic. Interesting comment that it's a last artifact. No, again, same problem. Nothing to give that context. Nothing to give it any type of, verification value or ability to, assess any validity in it. So I don't even know what to comment about that violin. One problem I would suggest with the violin, seemed to be in fairly decent shape. I don't know that something like that would survive too well. Wood. We're talking about wood and salt water. I don't know. I'm not an expert in that, but I know that they found ancient ships, that were made out of wood, but they're usually pretty severely degraded, at that point. And usually it's like the pottery and, any type of metals, obviously, especially anything like silver and gold. Silver degrades, gold doesn't. Those type of artifacts that seem to last the longest, where wood doesn't. Of course, we're not talking about hundreds of years yet, but even short period of time, if you ever see what salt water does to wood, something as delicate as a violin, I don't know. I'm not calling bullshit. I'm just saying I'm not sure there. But lastly, let's talk about canceling and the restriction of his live stream. That I can comment on very decisively. We need to stop that practice. It is really gotten out of control. And we've gotten to this place where we have people who have decided for us what is acceptable to talk about. Now, he wasn't spreading any type of hate speech. He wasn't doing anything like that. He was talking, and this is funny because especially I know Facebook does this. Facebook requires you to identify yourself and do all this stuff if you're going to talk about social issues or politics. That's insane. One of our main reasons for freedom of speech is for political discussion. That's really out of control that we've reached this point now, and somehow we've accepted that. We need to put a stop to this, and I'm not sure how we do that exactly, because the only ways I can see right now would be to stop using these streaming abilities, the streaming tech, and these companies, what they've provided. Now, there are people providing other platforms, and maybe that's what needs to happen. Unfortunately, we've got so many sheeple in this world, I doubt that they'll choose those other platforms. We're looking into those ourselves as well. Locals, Rumble, there's this new one we found called Clapper. I've heard there's like a lot of, quote unquote, sex workers on Clapper, which may be the case. So what? I don't care. Anywhere that fosters free speech, I think we really need to, sniff those out and use those tools to be able to speak our minds openly. And if we were able to find places that continue to support that, begin to move away from these companies that are going to continue to impact our freedom of speech. And I don't even agree at the hate speech level. There was some, I was just listening to something, again, it was one of these NPR stations. They were talking about, it's called like Freedom Business, Freedom something. In Vegas, there was some sort of seminar, some sort of gathering, and there was open hate speech going on there. And I actually agree with that. I don't agree with the hate speech itself. I agree with the ability to speak your mind, even if it is hateful, because I think when you sweep it under the rug, you actually make it worse. If you have the discussion openly, but I guess the assessment is we're not adult enough, we're not able to manage our egos enough to not get into a violent confrontation. And that's why that we're also concerned that people with impressionable minds may adopt these hateful mindsets. I have a major problem with that. If maybe we need to age restrict it, okay, I'm fine with that. Maybe we need to age restrict certain things, and we've done that for a long time anyway. But when it comes to adults and deciding what an adult is able to hear and decide for themselves what they believe and don't believe, even up to and including hate speech is insane. And I think we've really made some wrong moves in that department, because when you sweep it under the rug, I don't think you get rid of it. What you do is you get people to harbor those beliefs even more and to conduct meetings in secret and to further harden their position around the hateful beliefs they have. So I think it's just a wrong way to go about it. But this wasn't even that. This had nothing to do with any hateful speech. It's just that he was talking about a social issue. That's actually what it was, social and political issue. I know that had something to do with it because there's a policy restriction. I know I'm starting to learn about all this stuff, and that's what would have triggered that action that they took there. And it's absolute bullshit. We need to do something about it, guys. I'm going to start supporting other channels. But right now we got no choice. Guys like me, I got no following. We don't have any real solid foundation yet to make changes that would be meaningful. But if we can ever get there, I would definitely suggest boycotting these platforms that do those type of things. It's bullshit. So yeah, that's what I see there.
I did not break the law. Jesus Christ told you that 2,000 years ago. You don't understand me. That's your trouble. Not my fault because you don't understand me. I don't understand you either. But I don't spend my whole life trying to put the blame over on you because my cigarette didn't light or because something didn't work right. What do you want to call me a murderer for? I've never killed anyone. I don't need to kill anyone. I think it. I have it here. I don't need to live in this physical realm. I walk around in the physical realm and I put on the faces and I talk and I play and hang. Yeah, it's just a big act, man. In the spiritual world is where I live. I exist in places you never even dreamed of. You talk about, this little physical realm you live in, guilty, and is he in sin? Well, how's your courts guilty? How many people do you think you've hung on the ventilators in the nut wards and forced medication on them? You see what I'm saying? You don't have any idea what the hell's going on. If you knew what the hell was going on in your own system, then you'd say, now I see what's creating this. Society's creating it.
It's very interesting that they were able to convict Manson. I don't know fully enough about his, full trial and case and all the information they had. We have these laws around conspiracy that are interesting. They adopted these laws when you talk about, for instance, criminal enterprise and RICO Act laws and things like that. And I've, had my history in areas that would have touched upon some of those laws at the federal level. It's scary the way they're able to do that. Now, if I were to go out and tell you, hey, you should go out and kill someone, and you go do it, they attribute fault somehow. And that's an interesting thing, that somehow you're not able to think for yourself. There are some things I have a problem with that, that someone can tell you to do something because you did it. Now they're at fault for it. And there are laws, for instance, around instigating and encouraging criminal activity of any kind, especially around murder, drug activity, things like that. So if you encourage people and instigate people to do criminal acts, you can be held accountable and you can be held culpable for those. And I'm not sure who decided that was a moral, ethically sound, valid a restriction on our speech and how we interact with others. I'm because at the end of the day, I feel like a certain aspect of that is a removal of, personal responsibility for actions that were taken. But they found him guilty. And again, I don't know enough about his case. There may be some nastier parts to Manson. I think Manson, we only see Manson within the context of the situation he's in, which is facing his trial and then also being incarcerated in prison for the rest of his life. So, I don't know enough about Manson. It's not like I've ever done a deep dive into him. But some of the things he's saying, obviously, about society as a whole, I would 100% agree with, because he's attributing the behaviors of many people who are incarcerated and have done all kinds of ugly, things to others as really being the fault of society. And I would agree. I would have to agree with that. our society is built on false stilts, on a compromised and rotten foundation, and it's this is the results. This is the fruits of that. We're reaping what has been sown, and I definitely see what he's talking about there. And also, those were, I don't know what year that was in. He's talking about the mental asylums of the time, so that had to be a while ago, or maybe he was incarcerated for a while and didn't realize a lot of the changes that happened with the Reagan administration and kind of defunding the mental health, establishment of the time, which I think was probably not so black and white. I think there was a lot of abuses and misuses, but also there was potentially some, I'm sure, when you have a large organization, not everyone is evil within it. There are people trying to help. And there are people with very serious mental, illness difficulties that aren't even functional within society. The sad thing is the abuse and things that are done to those people, the advantage that's taken of them by pharmaceutical companies, by doctors, by people within those structures that benefit usually monetarily, or sometimes even worse, physical and sexual abuse of these people. Just awful things are done to these people. So really sad stuff. All of it, I would agree at a large scale picture level that Manson's talking about there is built off of the rotten foundation of the society that we've created over the past, 10,000 years. So, I agree there, but when he starts talking about, and I'm not sure who he's talking to there, if he's talking to jurors, if he's talking to a judge, if he's just, I don't know. But once you start talking about, I live in the spirit realm and places you can't even imagine, that delivery is not an effective delivery method. So he's going into a realm that people can just easily label him as crazy. And it appeared that was an old video because he didn't have the swastika tattooed on his forehead at that point. So at least he had that going for him. He changed tack later on. And, there's two forms. The other one's not the swastika. I believe it's a Buddhist symbol, but it has to do with the direction in which the bars are going on the symbol. So that's kind of interesting. Sad that one of those symbols was used for the purpose that it was. It's kind of like the Hitler mustache, right? You can't have the Hitler mustache. That got ruined for who knows how long. It's definitely still ruined to this day. Will it be ruined, 200 years from now? Maybe, maybe not. But if you have a Hitler mustache, you can't do it. Anyway, yeah, interesting stuff there. I don't even have all the answers. I'm not sure, but I have certain issues with conspiracy convictions to some degree. I think I don't know enough about his case, but I'm gonna leave it there.
My question is, I lost my mother this year.
You lost her? How clumsy of you.
She's transitioned to the other side, so I can't see her.
Well, you haven't lost her. You know where she is.
Yeah, I just can't see her.
It's very important that we actually discuss the difference in the way you express that.
Okay.
Because that's the reason why so many of you experience grief when you could be experiencing connection. You think of people transitioning back into spirit as a loss.
Okay.
Instead of a gain. Instead of an extension, instead of an expansion of your family, instead of them luring you into more connection, stretching you to be able to pick them up in spirit, which is one of the reasons why they leave when they leave. Mm-hmm. To get you to start focusing yourself on your own spirituality.
So what he's talking about there, stretching you, expanding you into being able to pick them up, he's talking about at a consciousness wavelength level, which is the idea that consciousness is not in the brain, and I pretty much firmly believe that. It's not initiating in the brain. So, yeah, here we go. We got someone who disagrees. Okay, I got a question for you. Have you ever done psychedelics? It's D's Nuts. Have you ever done psychedelics? D's Nuts, that's an interesting name. because psychedelics have a very interesting experience. Right. So you have no personal experience that you would be relatable for you to think that it's possible, and I don't blame you. And that is one of the issues with our world. And it doesn't have to be about death and connecting with someone after they've passed. It can be a lot of things. Have you ever surfed a wave at Pipeline? Have you ever done base jumping off a mountain? Of course, you can see those things take place, so it's not an issue of do you believe them happening or not. But I'll tell you right now, there's a lot to those experiences that unless you've had them yourself, you have no way of relating to them. So I just want to point that out contextually, that if you don't have a way to relate with connecting with the spiritual realm, then of course you're going to say, well, that just seems like a bunch of bullshit. However, scientifically speaking, it isn't so easy to actually say it's not possible. And we have people that are on both sides of that argument. But, and I've had discussions with people talking about the first law of thermodynamics and saying, well, that's bullshit to apply to this, but it's not. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. And that is a hard law of physics. So where does that energy go that's within us? It's a question. Now, again, I'm not going to relate to you on my experiences with psychedelics, but psychedelics are very, very powerful. And just a single psychedelic experience is not usually enough. It requires a deep dive into some rather dangerous territory if you haven't prepared your psyche for those experiences. So I think there's a lot to be discussed here, but I understand your perspective. If you don't have a way to relate to the experience of connecting with the spiritual realm, then you're not going to, and nobody can find fault with that. Deciding what you believe about the world is a fourth root fundamental of mental, emotional, spiritual health and skill development. And so assessing beliefs, I believe, is something that you should do fairly regularly, sort of like spring cleaning or something like that, where you kind of go in and take a look at what you believe, and is what you believe fostering a healthier, happier existence, then great. If you believing there's no way to connect with the dead helps you in some way that you feel better about life by believing that, then by all means maintain that belief. If not, if it's actually making life harder for you or more painful, then maybe you want to assess that belief. But that's all I would say there. I'm not pushing anything on anyone. What he's talking about here, though, from a perspective of someone like myself that's done these enormous amount of psychedelics that I have done, is an expansion of awareness. And that awareness expands to a higher level of awareness that mitigates suffering. Again, my belief here that I've stated in the past is that the universe is ever increasing in awareness, that is the actual meaning of life, that anytime we are hung up in our growth and our increasing of our own personal awareness, that's when we'll experience suffering. So awareness is the conduit towards relief and escape from suffering. So here, what he's talking about is an expansion of awareness to a degree that goes outside of just the physical form that we're in. And then you can see that what he's saying is you will see a mitigation of suffering and an increasing connection and feeling like you can connect with someone who's passed away. So it does align with one of the main fundamentals, the ultimate fundamental that I see that aligns with the one fundamental down from that, which is the 5 mountains of awareness. And so 100% logical in the way that I perceive what he's saying. So yeah, we can go ahead and continue now. See what he's going to say further.
The fact that you are there with them, mm-hmm. and by understanding that connection never goes away, still part of your family, still engaged with you, the idea then is that if you stop experiencing that as a loss, many times when people on your planet, I understand in the beginning it may be a little shocking, you may be unfamiliar with it, you may be disoriented, and you experience the idea of grief. We get that, and that's fine. But later, if you haven't allowed yourself to stretch and allow yourself to connect to them in spirit in the way that they're inviting you to do so, to know that they're always with you when you need them, then anytime they try to make a connection with you, you may suddenly start to think of them and feel grief again. The grief that all of you often feel is them attempting to get a message to you to say, I'm okay, but because you're experiencing my connection as a loss, you feel it as grief instead of as joy. So because you're funneling that energy through a negative belief system that says you've lost them, when in fact just the opposite is the case.
So this is the indigenous idea of ancestry, not ancestry like Ancestry.com or 23andMe, but ancestry at the level of important people in our lives that have died. And that idea from the, for instance, Native American perspective is one of a type of reincarnation even. So where they see the salmon that they use as a major food source as family members, as ancestors, as great grandparents, great uncles, great, cousins and things from the past. Same thing with the buffalo, that interconnected, eternal, spiritual realm that completes the cycle of life, and that's why their treatment of things like animals that were hunted and even plants and things was with such a high degree of respect and with such a minimal touch. They didn't take more than they needed, and they didn't approach the way we approach from this industrial perspective, which is extremely harmful to our environment. So that's something that everyone has to process on their own. We had someone here say, hey, I don't think there's a way to connect with the dead unless you're a necromancer or something. And so he's not in belief with that. And you know what? That's fine. I would say a couple of things. There's a cliche statement that says there are no atheists on the battlefield. And I can tell you that firsthand. My parents were atheistic. My father was an atheist when he was, facing his end, and when he was dying. He didn't start to open up and say, oh, I believe in this and this and this, but he started to go, well, I wonder what's going to happen now. What's coming next? It started to soften his position in a big way, because once you're truly faced with the end of this physical life, it does start to change your perspective. And then when you faced the loss of others within your life, and if you faced it multiple times, it does start to have a certain effect on you. Now, if you continue to, I think, progress on a very materialistic viewpoint of life, then those losses really are perceived as loss, and they are very difficult. I'm not sure that overcoming them is even fully possible if that's the mentality that you maintain, because there is no way to replace someone. So, me personally, I've had the experiences I've had, and I've done enormous amount of psychedelics, and I have had these experiences that led me to be able to have a internal familiar experience with connecting with the spirit world that definitely changes things, versus that sometimes, and I'm not trying to find fault in anyone's religion, but sometimes I find an issue with the religious practitioner that goes to the established place, whatever that is, the church, the mosque, the synagogue, whatever, and then their only experience is through someone else telling them that there's this connection that's there, and that people live on after death, and that that there's this higher spiritual level to life, and even to use the word God, but then have no personal familiar experience with that realm. I think that that's a limited place to experience life, and that is one of the reasons why I do think psychedelics are so powerful. But also, there's something you got to be very cautious with. They do have dangers to them. So, yeah, interesting. Yeah, grief is a very powerful thing. I also agree with what Bashar is saying there, but then there's another side to it. Grief is also a very valid emotion. There's nothing unreal about grief. So I don't think just shifting beliefs is enough. So I have to say that. Bashar is basically encouraging you to shift beliefs, he's encouraging a little more than that. He's not just talking about shifting beliefs, he's actually talking about shifting conscious levels. And I agree with that. That's good, but that will not just eliminate grief. Grief is a valid emotion that requires a purging, the ability to release that grief and to see what it leads to. Meaning that grief does not live alone. None, absolutely zero of the negative emotions live on their own. They're all layers of an onion. So and the only way to get through those layers of the onion is to not avoid, to not block, to not try to stuff down the emotion, but to actually allow it to come out and experience it wholly and completely, which is very unpleasant with, for instance, an emotion like grief. But then when you go beneath that layer, if you're able to make it to the next layer of emotion, you will find that there's another layer, and that these emotions are actually connected to past events in your life, and that are connected to trauma that's stored in your body, and that will eventually, if you continue down that pathway, lead you to a place of presence in the moment, which is a very spiritual moment, and then can allow you to connect at a level like he's suggesting. So I think there's a little more to it than just what he's saying there. That's what I would say about that.
Schools will be like, drugs are bad, and then prescribe a 6-year-old Adderall because they don't want to sit in the same spot for 8 hours.
And meanwhile, he's eating this huge ice cream sundae that's full of glucose, which is also a drug. So yeah, there's so much hypocrisy. It's insane. No, yeah, that was great. And there you go. That's the hypocrisy. That's the contradicting logic. It makes no sense whatsoever. And I think that's why, actually, I think that children in general and people in general sense the hypocrisy and the contradiction, and it drives them to experiment with drugs even further in an unwise way, let's say. And then, of course, there's the trauma and there's the sociological pressures and sociological toxicity of a lot of our world, and you have a recipe for drug addiction because of that. So I think it's a very ill-advised perspective and way to approach the topic, to say that drugs are just bad, and then you have this whole hypocrisy. Drugs are bad, but alcohol is okay as long as you do it a certain way. You know, drugs are bad. We still sell tobacco, but we recommend you don't do it. Drugs are bad, but here's a bunch of sugar, and we don't look at sugar as a drug. It's 100% a drug, very powerful drug. You know, drugs are bad, but they're okay if the doctor prescribes them to you. There's just so much hypocrisy and bullshit, and people sense it. And I think that's a huge reason why you have the problems we have today with drugs. So I couldn't agree with it more. He did it very short, very simple. Here's an example of a contradiction that points to the bullshit. Absolutely agree with him there. So yeah, you know me, guys. My passion is that topic, especially, and I'll be honest with you, I've been doing this marketing courses, I've been doing this stuff, and you know, it's really opened up some things for me. But you know, I'm going to talk about that a lot more as we go forward in my perspective on this stuff. But yeah, that's it for this episode, guys. So we're gonna leave it there. What I would also kind of add further to that discussion in general, all this stuff is around belief. A lot of those, if you could see, is kind of beliefs and digging in deeper into different things. We got Manson and what he's saying, and you know, we've got a lot of ideas. We got a guy who's talking about human trafficking and context there, and that's a little different context of what do you believe. You got to be careful about current events and what you believe. You know, you got to be careful about what you accept as fact. There's so much to this concept of belief. Bashar's talking about the belief that comes with, you know, someone's passing. This guy's talking about the beliefs around a social issue like drugs. It's a really, really important side of life. Is the fourth root fundamental to MES, what I call it, MES journey, or mental, emotional, spiritual journey, and skill development. And, you know, for me, that drug topic is a huge one because ultimately, as I was mentioning, going to these marketing courses, you know, I kind of ask, what's your mission? What's your biggest mission? What are you really out to do? And I'll be honest with you, my biggest mission is to end the war on drugs. That would be the ultimate, to end it decisively and completely because it is so ill-advised. It is such a terrible way to proceed with a very important social topic and one that's extremely damaging, and it has horrible consequences for the casualties of the war. And it's really not the opposite sides of the war that are the casualties. It's the people in the middle. It's the low-level dealers. It's the consumers and addicts. It's the people that are incarcerated. It's the people that are going through the suffering of addictions, the people who suffer from overdose. All of those victims are victims of the war on drugs. They're not the victims of drugs. Drugs are not the problem. So yeah, I feel pretty passionately about that, and that is something we're going to keep hammering home. But there's a lot of other ideas that are similar in the way that we approach them with our black and white viewpoints and their very childish way of looking at the world. The world's a complex place. Very rarely is it black and white. And so, yeah. Anyway, guys, I keep encouraging people, get in there, do the therapy, do the self-work, become more self-aware, and through more self-awareness, you'll become more aware of others, and through that awareness, you'll become more aware of your interactions with others in the environment, and eventually reach a place where things start to make a lot more sense. Things start to feel a lot less lost, and if you're interested in that type of journey, go and check out psychedelics.com. We've got a lot of practitioners on there, a lot of great people doing some good work, and it's not just about psychedelics. That is not what it's about. It's about doing daily work towards growing your own awareness and healing, your mind, body, and soul. So, all right, guys, we'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot. Okay, guys, hopefully you've been liking the content we've been providing so far. We've been covering a lot of different topics here. And, for long form, you're checking us out here on YouTube. Also, you can find us on Rumble for short form. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok at ThePemPod. Also, be sure to check out psychedelics.com. There we're providing a lot of different services. We've actually made further progress on the development of the website, which eventually will be an app. You can find treatment options there, including retreat centers, clinical facilities, individual trip sitters, clinicians, facilitators, integration coaches. We've got all that up now, and then we've got something called the Learning Center where you can go if you don't really know that much about psychedelic therapy or you want to learn something about a particular niche there. We will be including that soon. So go ahead and check out all of those areas there if you guys want, and just happy to be here with you. So hopefully have you here taking in more of our content in the near future. Thanks. It'd be great if you left a like, and also if you'd leave a comment would be awesome. We'd love to interact with you guys in the comments below. Also, if you would like to have me react to a video that you choose and that you think would be a good one for me to take a look at, or even a personal video or request of some sort, you can email us at thepempod@gmail.com, and I'd love to hear from you and interact with you there.